Hi, I'm Jim Boccarossa, and welcome to Aviation Tech Talks. In this podcast series, we'll be speaking with industry experts and pioneers, delving deep into the latest developments and advancements in aviation tech. From futuristic aircraft designs to cutting-edge digital solutions, we'll be exploring how technology is shaping the future of the industry. So buckle up and join us for an exciting ride as we take off into the fascinating world of aviation tech. Welcome, everybody, to Aviation Tech Talks, where innovation takes flight. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Boccarossa, and I'm pretty excited today because I have an expert in the field of digitizing the supply chain. We've got the CEO of SkyThread, Mark Roboff. So, Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so Mark and I got a chance to hang out together at Aerospace Tech Week, and I almost feel that you and I have almost the similar stance on what we can do in this industry and help bring digitization. So I think today's discussion will really be great for some of our viewers. For those of you who are not familiar with Mark and his background, I've got a little bio here that I'd like to share with our viewers, Mark, and please add anything you think is appropriate here. But Mark Roboff is the co-founder and CEO of SkyThread.aero. It's a new venture building the future of digital connectivity for the aviation industry. He's also the founder and board member of the Independent Data Consortium for Aviation. Prior to that, Mark was the general manager for digital transformation, aerospace, and defense at DXC. And prior to that, he served as the global solutions leader for aerospace and defense at IBM. Mark has over 15 years experience in aviation digital transformation, both as a software engineer and as a business and technology executive. Mark is a recognized thought leader on artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as MRO data processes and analytics. Mark has worked on and contributed to many of the industry's largest digital MRO platforms, and he has also worked with dozens of airlines across the globe on prognostics, predictive maintenance, and the optimization of maintenance execution. Mark is also the chair of the SAE G34 Euro CAE WG114 Joint International Committee for AI in Aviation, and he is leading 500 aerospace engineers, software developers, data scientists, safety experts, and regulators define a means of compliance for AI certification. So, Mark, that is a mouthful. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think I need to trim down.
Well, it's an impressive background, so I don't know where we would trim it down. I mean, we did miss the Carnegie Mellon background, so I think we missed
true.
I think you left that off there, but for our viewers, what an excellent engineering school out there.
And yet there's so few of us that went into, at least in my year and the years above and below, there's so few of us that went into aviation. So we all know each other and we're all friends.
I think we were at a conference, like I mentioned last couple of weeks ago, where you had a fellow Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That was the stuff.
Yeah. So, Mark, I think it's going to be great. I think today's going to be an excellent discussion. I kind of wanted to start out with and get your thoughts on this issue that came up with a company called AOG Technics. They were found to falsify documents in the supply chain. And for those viewers who are not familiar with this, this company was selling used material, but representing that material as new. A lot of the mainstream media has covered this. It's been in Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, the USA Today. So I get a lot of calls from my friends that aren't even in aviation asking.
Yeah, me too.
That's right. And a lot of times some of those media outlets got the information incorrect, saying it was fake parts when it was really falsified documentation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark, on where you think digital solutions could have helped or help prevent in the future this kind of situation taking place to really authenticate these parts.
This is a doozy, isn't it?
Well, it got a lot of attention, and so
Sure
I
has.
think it's important to talk about.
So let's talk about exactly. I think Jim, you gave a good overview of what the problem was with AOG techniques. And they're forging these airworthiness documents, passing off used parts as new. And this is, as you mentioned, it's been quite a scandal over the last 6 months as it's been discovered, and it's impacted every of the major U.S. airlines. So Delta has parts from these guys, American has parts from these guys, United has parts from these guys, West has parts from these guys, and they have parts with airlines all over the world. I think it was first discovered. I think the whole issue was first discovered by a maintenance technician out of TAP Portugal. But what's so interesting is that this is not a new problem. This is a flare-up of a problem that has ebbed and flowed in the industry, but has never ceased, going back 25, 30 years. And, we have to understand that the reason this problem exists is because there's fraud in life, there's fraud in society, but it exists and continues to exist in aviation because despite how high-tech aeroplanes are and how high-tech so much of how you and I as passengers interact with aviation can be today, as we know, the way the business of aviation is managed, the business of flying airplanes, the operational aspects of that, right? Especially and critically, the business of maintaining airplanes, right? It's paper. It's returning back the clock 35, 40 years. It's signing paper airworthiness certificates. It's signing paper maintenance records, right? Paper post-flight reports, and paper logs. And given the lifespan of aircraft, the aircraft that fly today have 30, 40-year lifespans. Given the lifespans of parts, keeping the paper trail were a part of when you have a million parts in a plane, when those parts can be 10, 15 years old, is incredibly hard to do, right? Which makes it easy to write a fake airworthiness certificate to say, hey, here's this new part, when it's actually not. There isn't a good defense to that yet. And, I'll say, Jim, a lot of people look at this and say, anyone can fake a certificate, whether it's digital or not, right? So I guess the problem's intractable. What do we do? Let's just move on. That's not the point. The point is we don't have information available to provide a check against what the forms say. That's why we need to digitize, right? It gives us that armor. It gives us that defense to say, okay, right, is what I'm reading about this part legit? Or do we know that there's a different history here that now makes us question what was sold to us, right? We don't have the ability to do that today in aviation globally, and I think that's what you and I in our respective circles are trying to solve for.
That's right. And it's more not just having that, because there are technologies out there that could be used to help solve this, right?
Sure.
I think anybody watching today has experienced the giant room of legal boxes full of paperwork.
Yes.
There are entire companies out there that store these records in giant facilities, and the owners of the aircraft or the operators of the aircraft pay to store these paper documents.
Yep.
So that in and of itself doesn't lend any technical solution when that data is sitting on these documents in these giant, vast, I like to say, if anyone's watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, at the very end, they say, well, what happened to the Ark? And they say, well, it's being studied by top scientists, and you see a guy wheeling a cart into this vast warehouse. That's what these facilities look like.
I've never seen the Indiana Jones movies, believe it or not, but
Oh no,
my son loves the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland, so I'm very familiar with that.
Well, now I would definitely recommend Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is one of my favorites.
That's the first one, right?
Yes. And the Holy Grail is also excellent, but I'm digressing here. So,
okay, yeah.
So if we start with that, and really talking about the issue is not just faking documents, right? Because some, clients I've spoken with, given our place in the industry, they say, oh, we're digital. And I say, oh, you're digital. Yeah, we've scanned all of those documents. We now have PDFs, right? But it doesn't solve the problem that you just mentioned of,
not at all.
Right. Is this a valid document? Because desktop software, it's easy to copy those. Well, I have it digital too. So it's not just about digital. And so one of the very hot topics out there in the industry is around blockchain technology, right? And it got very popular in the cryptocurrencies, but there's a lot of discussions now saying, how can we leverage that technology here in this industry? So, would you take a second and kind of explain how blockchain could help and provide this transparency and traceability to the market?
Absolutely. So let's take it back to what you said about, I have this document and I've scanned it and now I have a PDF, right? So I'm digital. And you said, well, that's not true, which is true. That's not true. So let's start there and let's sort of like, let's connect the dots and really understand why there needs to be more than just turning paper into files on a computer in order to fix this. So I'm sure Jim, that there are two ways to scan a PDF. Right? You can scan scan a document into a PDF. Right? You can just sort of do an imaging scan, which is like you're scanning the document, it's creating a photo of that document, right? And it's putting that photo in a PDF, but then it stops, right? And that PDF, it could be a JPEG, right? I could say, oh, here's a document on my desk. I'm going to take a picture of it with my phone. Voila, job done. In a sense, that does digitize the paper, but only at the most shallow surface level. Because what it's not doing is it's not actually reading and extracting the data in that paper, right? There's nothing like that going on. So that's where we have to go in and not just say, okay, it's not just about scanning a document and poof, I have a PDF. You have to what we call OCR, optical character recognition. You have to have the scanning software read the information. But even that, only gets you so far, because when you have OCR software read information about a document, it typically does so in a vacuum, right? And OCR software is never going to be like any automated process, 100% accurate. So now the question is, how do I know that the OCR software, what it recognized off the scan, is actually correct? How do I know that it got the serial number correct, especially if it was handwritten, especially if it has, ones and L's in them, right? So now, where blockchain comes in is really, connecting. It's not about what blockchain really helps us do in this context is it helps us connect databases and silos of information together, right? So imagine scanning information about a part, right? Adding to a digital compilation of that part's history. Right? We have a part, it's had a couple of maintenance events in its life. We just finished an overhaul. Now I want to scan the details of that overhaul, right, and add it to the history that I've already collected digitally about that part. Well, if I have all the information about that part in one place, right? I could go and scan it and just do a lookup of the results of that scan to say, okay, right, do the serial numbers match? Do the part numbers match? And be good to go. But very rarely does any one enterprise have all the history, of all their parts. When we consider the complexity of the aftermarket value chain, when we consider, again, the longevity of part life cycles, what we recognize is that lots of different actors have pieces of history, right? And we need a way to be able to share data, so that when needed, any one actor can go and get the full history from everyone else, right? In a federated way. And that's what blockchain enables. Blockchain, to put it at its most simple, basic, you know, I want to make it as unsexy, as uninteresting as possible, because its real utility is not in crypto. For at least for what we're talking about in this industry. It's not in crypto. It's not public mining. It's not tokens. It's not NFTs. And I'll refrain from saying what I think about that world. But just having a distributed, secure, tamper-resistant database, right? Distributed being a key word, where governance is a first-order principle, where the entire nature of the database in terms of what goes in and how information is accessed is built off a consensus governance model. That's all it is, and that's the ticket. Because having that consensus governance model means I can't have different actors share bits and pieces of the history that they have together to one actor to see the full history without having to go and physically collect the data and store it in one place, right? You can create a constellation of databases that can act as one, right? Where everyone, agrees to work together because you have a consensus governance model. That's what really blockchain enables. It's all about that consensus governance.
Right. Yeah. And I think you hit on a key point there. One of the pros of the technology is distributed.
Yes.
Right. So, but when we say distributed, a lot of people start to talk about, they say, well, is that sharing? Does that mean I'm sharing data? Right. If I'm also part of this technology. Now, so how would you address some of the folks who say, and I get this a lot, well, our data is proprietary and I don't want to share that. And so if I'm on blockchain and I'm putting this information there, everyone else has access to it now.
Yeah.
How would you?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to get your comments there and on what you would say to those folks.
Right. So first and foremost, the whole premise of blockchain is that, yes, at the end of the day, you're sharing data. I mean, the whole reason that we're here is to say you need to be sharing data in order to solve some of these larger problems, like fake parts. Mm-hmm. So the question is not, can I share data? Right. We can sit and for hours articulate many use cases where the sharer and the sharee receive a lot of value by sharing data. There's a tremendous amount of value creation in sharing data. The question is, how do I have control over the data I share? And how do I have assurance that the data that I have control over is shared explicitly and only in the way I want, and never in the way I do not want, and never with people I do not want? And again, that's where the governance model comes in. So let's talk about this at two levels. Let's talk about the physical level, and let's talk about the logical, right, execution of all of this. So at the physical level, we talk about distributed data. What's really important to understand is that while, in a blockchain, everyone may have a copy of the full blockchain, anyone that's hosting the blockchain node, it's not like they can go and access everyone's data in their blockchain. That data is fundamentally encrypted. But what the governance model then allows us to do, right? And what IDCA, the Independent Data Consortium for Aviation, is set up to do in creating the governance that then gets implemented in that blockchain is to say, okay, these are the conditions for which we can all agree, data can be shared. And these are the levers of control that everyone who has data, who has the ability to share, has at their disposal to determine what gets shared, in what manner, when, and to whom. So I want to make this very, very clear, right? When we talk about blockchain and data sharing, this is not about taking data that is under lock and key and making it available, in a state change in the open for anyone to see whenever they want. Now, the data that's under lock and key remains under lock and key. What we're enabling is for the industry, through a common standard and interface, to say, okay, you have a request to see this information about the part, where certain information that could be proprietary to me, such as what I paid for the part. Right? We're going to keep that separate. But the technical data, such as the part was flown on this aircraft for 3,000 hours across 300 cycles, etc., that can be shared, and only that can be shared. And what the blockchain can do is manage that, manage who gets to share data with who, keeps a record of who gets to share data with who, under what conditions, under what levels of obfuscation. So it gives control. It's about enabling control so that data can be shared.
Right. And so, in kind of that model, right, and you mentioned the IDCA, how does the IDCA address, okay, we can share part number, serial number, times, cycles, what MSN this part was on? How do they decide? Well, that we're all okay with sharing that information. Maybe I'm an airline, and I don't want someone to know I have this part on this plane. Or does that come up, or how do they address those to make this and get everybody to comply with those rules? Right. I like to say, when we look at some of these things, the great thing about standards is everybody's got one, right?
Right.
And it's hard to get everybody to agree on one outside of a government regulation, right? It's the herding cats problem. So, how, if we were to implement this system, which, if it was in place and we were sharing part number, serial number, times, and cycles, I now have this part, going back to our first discussion with the AOG Technics situation. And now I have a certificate that says part number ABC, serial number 123 is new, and it matches physically with the part. So I say, oh, it looks new, it's clean, great. But if I look on blockchain, that part number and serial number says it has 4,242
Right.
cycles on it.
And now you have your defense.
Right.
That's it. So the way we get there is in a lot of IDCA. In that sense, you sort of said the magic word. It's run like a standards organization. So this is an industry that is very familiar with standards. More than that, this is an industry that runs off standards. Right? The way aircraft are developed, the way systems on aircraft are developed and certified, all are produced through standards. The way we know the fly-by-wire system on an aircraft is safe, the way the regulators know that it's safe, and thus we trust that it's safe because we trust the regulators. That process of assessing and determining safety of an aircraft, right, is driven by standards. Operationally, right, maintenance, the way we do maintenance is driven by standards, right? MSG3. The way we format our data, our maintenance data, right? Spec 2000 is driven by standards. So this is an industry that runs off standards more than many others. So, the way that the governance gets created is the same way that software assurance standards get created, or the same way that maintenance work order or planning standards get created. You have an independent body that serves, and this is a critical piece, as a nonprofit or a trade association that can provide antitrust protection to bring people together. I'm going to use the special term here, pre-competitively. Right? So you're bringing together folks in a pre-competitive space. It's a standard-setting environment by operational definition and by legal definition. It's pre-competitive space. Say, we have this common industry problem. We recognize and agree that it's an industry problem. We recognize and agree that we need to come up with a common solution so that we can, do X. X being fair data for preventing fake parts. So now it's about, either going to an existing platform, or in the case of IDCA, creating a new platform that then creates the environment for everyone to come together and work pre-competitively, create a consensus standard. And we use words here, pre-competitive, consensus, but there are well-defined processes behind ensuring that consensus is achieved. So it says how the standards are written, how they're approved upon, how they're reviewed, commented upon, and critically voted upon, and ultimately published. Right? Those mechanisms are well defined based on a consensus governance model that is well established in the industry, from technical standards to operational standards. So now we're taking this to a new area, governance standards, but it's the same approach that the industry has been long familiar with.
Yeah, and we talked standards, and a lot of these things have been standardized, right? And you talk about development of aircraft systems, but a lot of that has government regulation over the top of it, right?
Yeah.
To know this is safe, right? And so it forced some of the actors in the supply chain to adopt it. But both you and I are both part of the SAE, and that's our entire job, is to write standards in a non-competitive environment where we've got Boeing and Airbus and Honeywell and Collins and everybody working together, and the top engineers to say this is what we should do. Right? And both you and I have developed these standards that are out there, yet the adoption on some of these standards has been difficult, in the absence of a government regulation over the top of it. So,
Yeah.
How do you see some of those challenges? And let's relate it now to digital adoption, where, you'll have a conversation with a client to say, here's the standard. Oh, no, no, no. We do it differently. Right? How do you face those challenges, and what would be some of your thoughts there, how to overcome them?
Yeah. It's a great question, Jim. And you're absolutely right. Right. So, well, I'll compare just to reemphasize your point. Right. The standards that you and I produce in SAE typically are engineering standards. More than that, they're engineering process standards. And those are the standards that sort of traditionally get picked up by regulators and say, this is it. Right. Which turns, a standard, the best description of a standard, and nothing to do in aerospace. I was just reading this on Hacker News. Someone was complaining about an IEEE standard for something that they were developing in some other field, and they were upset that they had to pay IEEE to download the standard. And someone made a comment that, yes, a standard is a law you have to pay to read, because if you don't follow the law, i.e., the standard, you can't bring your product to market, right? And certainly in engineering, that's true in aerospace and defense. You can't produce an avionics system unless you're going to certify it now via DO 178C. Well, you go to RTCA and you have to pay to become a member, or you have to pay to download DO 178C. It's you're spot on. And in this industry, what that's really called is the regulator taking a standard and saying it is now an acceptable means of compliance. Those are the magic words. And that is what takes a standard and turns it into a little industry of its own. But there are standards that you and I are both familiar with that do not have that same regulatory relationship. A good example of that is Spec 2000, right? So the ATA standards don't really have that same relationship. There's some that sort of do, but they're not universal. And that has a lot to do with how regulatory works, in the sense that when we talk about maintenance and maintenance operations, critically, those are in the operational space, not necessarily in the certification space, right? And regulators in the operational space work very differently. So there are a couple of things here. The way we solve this, the way we get traction is twofold. The question, do I want regulators to say, yes, you have to use the IDCA standard? Yes, that would be lovely, right? And there's a plan to get there, of course, but that's a decades-long plan, because we know that a lot of this is dependent upon a broader convergence that we're seeing in machine learning certification around how you deal with data systems, right? So the idea today is we don't certify data systems. That may not be true, but we're talking about a sea change in the here and now. And through the life of IDCA and SkyThread, it's all been about showing value. And the value, the ROI on things like parts traceability is enormous. So when we are able to go to an airline and demonstrate just the operational savings that a parts traceability data sharing system could enable around eliminating parts quarantine, or reducing turnaround time on component repair, for OEMs, the just visibility that such a system can give into their market, that enables much better demand planning. We have one customer who, is implementing SkyThread in part, and I won't name the name of the customer, but to say that they are an OEM, of which we have several on board. Say, when we have a customer, when a customer airline call us for an AOG event, we know that we're the caller of last resort. When the airline calls us for an AOG, because we're the OEM, we're going to charge the highest price. Right? It means they've already gone to ILS, they've already gone to AeroExchange, they've already gone to anywhere else they can go to get a part. They couldn't get it from any of them, so they're calling us. And even though we are, right, the AOG solver of last resort, right, we can only fulfill AOG requests, some 58 to 60% of the time, which is remarkable. Why is that? And I share that because that's not unique to one manufacturer. That's pretty common. And it's because no one has any visibility once parts are made where they are. So no one can do any demand planning in the aftermarket. And parts traceability fixes that. So I look at, a standard, a data standard like Spec 2000 or Spec 2500 can seem pretty back office, records management and whatnot. The work we're doing here is not. The work we're doing here is front and center, in my view, digital transformation, because it's really about unlocking this near-term ROI that just, in terms of, we talk about AOG, that's safety. Safety is huge. Safety is obviously the most important, criteria for which, we need to run the industry by. But value is right there with it. Right? And being able to get that ROI, being able to unlock that value is how you get adoption.
Yeah. I mean, you hit on a couple of important things there, right? That absent a regulation, what will create the adoption, right? Safety, yes. However, I've had conversation with suppliers that say, oh, you just need to know your vendors. Yes, but that still doesn't mean they have even the accurate data on the material, right? But it's an economic, what you just described in that case study is the economics of if, in that case, for the OEM, if they were to see the parts in the supply chain, maybe it's at a supplier, maybe it's being operated on a current flying aircraft, and they can see as the cycles accumulate, and they can start predicting what parts they will need because they have visibility into it, right? That's the um, the economic decision for the OEM. The
Absolutely.
same can hold true for the supply chain, right? Because it's all
Absolutely.
going to be shared, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I
And
think
and
that's
and to that person, to that supplier that said you just need to know your vendors, we take it back to AOG, right? And you're going to say, okay, well, the four largest airlines in the world that have the best safety records in the world, they not know their vendors, right? If they if Delta doesn't know their vendor, then how about your average airline with 20 aircraft?
mm-hmm. Right. And the
I
person that was the CEO of that firm worked at extremely reputable parts suppliers prior to that.
indeed, indeed,
So, that didn't solve the answer, but that's the lack or hesitancy of adopting these digital solutions, right? But I think the point is now the economics, the cost to replace these parts and take down the engines, and the plane's going to be grounded, and the manual work. I mean, it's going to be in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
yeah.
So, that's why I think it's getting front and center. So what would you say in the future? I'd love to get your thoughts here on where you see some trends in the future with this kind of digitization efforts, and maybe you could expand on a couple of those points.
Yeah, the way I see the work we're doing is, and that I don't want to answer with a sort of a cantankerous counterpoint, but I'll be a little cantankerous. For me, what we're doing is not about trends. What we're doing here really is focused on a mission to improve efficiency and a mission to improve safety, and this is an industry that, as you know very well as I do, moves slowly, conservatively, and especially around digital. I don't think has a good track record of responding to trends. So whatever trends may come up, the focus is on building this out and making sure that there is a critical mass that can come in the next couple of years to really make cases like AOG impossible to do in the future. But when we look at what is going to accelerate the digitization of the supply chain, I think the biggest thing, and this is what ties my work in standards to my work, in the commercial realm with supply chain. So what ties it together? It's machine learning. It's AI, right? So AI is so disruptive a technology that it's going to be one of those things that completely transforms things about our industry we haven't even begun to think about yet. It's one of those things. Anyone that says we know exactly what AI is going to look like and how it's going to be used and where it's going to be applied, um, I don't think unless they're coming from the future, really knows it all. But what we do know is that whatever we want machine learning to do, it's only going to do as good a job as the data behind it, right? So especially as we begin to use machine learning in things that impact flight safety, which, believe it or not, is a thing. It is a thing. EASA has the AI roadmap. We talked about this in Atlanta. And there's a lot of work that's being done right now to certify machine learning systems in aircraft that can fly aircraft and do bits and pieces and functions of flying an aircraft. Now the validity and the truth, the veracity of data becomes paramountly important, hugely important. And supply chain data is a ground source of data that's going to be used to power all sorts of AI and machine learning. So machine learning, that is over the next 10 years, that is the trend that's going to catalyze everything more than anything else.
Yep, I think we see that all the time in the media. AI, machine learning, it's number one, and I think your key point there was the supply chain is going to be paramount to be part of that so that the AI models and machine learning can have the data. And if we haven't digitized it, we won't be able to realize the benefits
Right.
of it. Right.
Right.
So, to kind of wrap up today, I think we touched on a lot of topics today. Would you give any to some of our viewers? Would you give them any thoughts or advice on what they could start with to help them digitize their supply chains?
Go to ProvenAir and go to SkyThread, of course. No. So that's a very broad question. Aside from going to ProvenAir and SkyThread, which I highly recommend your viewers do, you really have to have a strategy in terms of what you want to accomplish and what you have at your disposal. So if you're an airline and you are probably, if you're a big airline, you may already have things like electronic logbook deployed. If not, you probably have plans to deploy electronic logbook. You're probably evaluating, as you would every year, your maintenance supply chain, your inventory systems, your back-end IT systems, where all of this comes together is the way I look at trends, the way I look at where folks can spend their time and money and interest. Right, we just go 30,000 feet. Is that you can spend a lot of time and focus on things like predictive maintenance, things like big data, things like analytics, getting data out of the aircraft, making use of the ACMS data, your ACARS data, your QAR data, time series data, to predict the component failure. And that's what Airbus Skywise is all about, and Honeywell, and Collins, and Lufthansa, and the Aviator platform. And that's all good, right? But here's the but. What I've seen in my 10 years sitting in the intersection of digital and MRO is that the most valuable data that can really turn ROI quickly, it's not the data that's coming from the aircraft, it's the data that's written about the aircraft. It's the data in the warehouse. It's the data that needs to be scanned in OCR. It's the data that is contained in the maintenance information system, right? It's the data about the parts, the maintenance history, the maintenance records, all of that. And the use cases that you and I are working on around those, the digitization, the records management, lifecycle management, parts traceability that we're solving for at SkyThread in particular, that is going to provide a near-term ROI that we don't see in predictive maintenance.
That's right.
And I think a pivot to the data that's captured around the aircraft, that's where I'd focus my time.
Great. Awesome. And I think that I would 100% agree with you again on that. I feel like we agree on everything. So not sure we can have good debates
I don't know
if we're always agreeing.
Yeah.
But yes, immediate ROIs, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to get the economics moving so that we can digitize the supply chain. But Mark, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your insights. For any viewers out there, please check out SkyThread.aero for more information on some of the things that are happening in this realm. And Mark, we hope to see you soon in the next few months. Please come to Chicago for MRO Americas. We'd love to have you.
Looking forward to it.
Great.
I'll see you there, McCormick.
Awesome.
All right, Jim.
Thanks, everybody, for joining today. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation and you got a lot of great insights.
All right. Cheers. Have a good one. Good weekend, all.